not sure that's how much logic there was in
Yes,
some of it.
or
All right. So, okay. So last week, we'll start with, wait, I got to share the screen. Share screen, share screen. There you go. All right. So last week we ended with, how you behave on a fast day. And the suggestion was that from to the middle of the day, you focus on communal issues, because, of course, why are you fasting? There's a catastrophe happening, and usually a drought. And according to the theology of the Talmud, well, it must be we did something. So you focus on self-reflection, and then the second half of the day is split between Torah study and study of the prophets, and then prayer. So the beginning here on page 13a says, wait a minute, I would change it around. Ipuchana. I can reverse it. You can say that the pray first and then focus on the concerns of the community. Why is that necessary? And we did have a verse from Nehemiah where they pulled that from, that idea. But then they say, well, here, lo sal kadatach, don't let it enter your mind to think that way. For once again, they bring another verse. And the verse here is, then were assembled to me everyone who trembled at the words of the God of Israel due to the faithlessness of them of the captivity. Right there, we're talking about our weaknesses, our mistakes, what we should change, what we have to, self-reflection. Then, and at the meal offering, I arose from my fast, and I spread out my hands to God. So at the end, this is from Ezra. It's very interesting. Ezra and Nehemiah are from the same period of time. They work together. And once again, we see at the end of the day, you pray, and the beginning of the day, you focus on self-reflection. Now we go into a new section. And Amar Rafram Bar Papa Amar Rav Chisda. So this is Rav Chisda's idea. Kol shehu mishum Evel. Anybody who's in a position of mourning, for example, Tisha B'Av, which is a national day of mourning, or one is mourning for a parent. Asur bein b'chamin bein b'tzonin. You don't wash at all during that period of mourning. So either Tisha B'Av you don't wash. The 7 days of mourning you're not washing in any kind of water. Kol shehu mishum ta'anu. But if it's because of pleasure, if the things you're refraining from, the prohibitions are simply to refrain from pleasure, like on a minor fast, a ta'anit tzibur, you can't wash in chamin, but you can wash in sonain. And Steinsaltz gives us an explanation. You can wash in sonain for cleanliness. You're not washing for pleasure, but just to clean yourself. And then Amar Rav Idi Bar Avin says, we learn it in the Mishnah too. Afana nami tanena v'noalin et hamir chatzot. See, in the Mishnah that we had up above, it said on these days they lock on these public fast days, they lock the bathhouses. Well, that was the one place where you get water. So for hot water. So obviously, you don't you can't wash in hot water. And if you've ever been, I mean, when I was in Israel, it was the only time I did this, but there's these places like Turkish baths where you go and it's really, they're very large baths. You go and it's very hot water and it's all types of bath. Some of them are cold pools, some of them are hot pools. And it is, you go there for, probably that's, where people would go bathe. You didn't have a bathtub in your house. Anyway, so the Mishnah points that out. But Abaye finds a weakness in that thinking. He says, Amar le Abaye, ve'i betzonin asur sochrin et hanharot miba'e le lemitne. If they prohibited you to, if the rule was you couldn't wash in cold water, would they have told us, well, stop up the rivers? Meaning that they're two separate things. Washing is one thing. That the cause and effect is not necessarily so. Because you can't wash in hot water, the repercussion or the ramifications, the effect is you got to close the bathhouses. That could be a totally separate reason why you're closing the bathhouses. Maybe, bathhouses are a place where people go to hang out. It's not just because of the hot water, but they're just going, it's like going to the pub or something for men. So that's why they're closing it. It's not appropriate, but you could say that it doesn't necessarily mean that's why hot water is forbidden, but cold water is permitted. That's not proof. So Amar Rav Shesha Barei de Rav Idi. So he says Rav Shesha, in the name of his father, explains Abba Hachi Kashle. This was his difficulty and why he explained it the way he did. Michdei Tanan Asur Berechitza Noalin et Merchatzot. See, it wasn't just cause and effect. It's that first it says you're forbidden to wash, which is a general prohibition. No washing. That sounds like you can't wash at all. Then it says Noalin et Merchatzot. You close the hot water places. It sounds like you've got a general prohibition and then a modifying prohibition. Ela lav shmamina b'chamin asur b'tzonein mutar. So isn't it correct to conclude from this that bathing is prohibited in hot water, but you are permitted in cold water? So it's a general prohibition then modified.
I didn't the logic here at all.
Well, see, so if the first statement, there are two he's reading it in this way. There's two statements. Statement number one is no washing. All right, so no washing means no washing. But then it says no alina to merchatzot. So it sounds like, since the merchatzot is the understanding here, is that that's where you would go to wash in hot water. It sounds like it's then modifying this general prohibition and limiting it to just hot water.
But my problem is a little different. I'm not permitted to murder.
Right.
There's a law, there are laws against my having my own private. I wish I could state this on a smaller scale, but our laws are crazy enough that I can't. There are laws against my having my own private nuclear weapons.
What I got from it, sorry.
Using some other weapon.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
What
Okay.
I got was that because it said you can't do it for pleasure, and a cold shower really sucks versus a hot shower or something. So they're sort of taking away the pleasurable one. And I think there was the notion of, all right, we need to conserve water, so don't bathe. But isn't there also restriction about going into the temple being dirty? So you have to wash at least a little bit so that you're allowed to Torah study and go into the temple to pray.
Well, no. Going into the temple doesn't have to do with cleanliness. It has to do with purity. So those are two different things. So purity, you can be as clean and be in a state of ritual impurity if you had touched a dead body. So it's not about cleanliness going into the temple, but but I see what you're saying. Yeah. So Chuck, yeah. So the logic doesn't necessarily work, but I think that's what Rav Shesha is trying to explain. That's how his father came up with this. That's how he explained it. That's how he understood it, I should say. That you had these two statements. First one was no washing. Then the next one is locking the bathhouses. He saw it as a mitigation of the more general prohibition first, but you saw that Abai, they didn't accept it. Or he pointed out that it didn't make sense. But then we go on, and so now we've got a Lema Misaile. Let's say that this is this Baraita that we have supports, going back to Rav Chista's view, that, because this is where I got a little, okay. No, in morning, nothing, no hot water or cold water. In restrictions where it's about pleasure, like a communal fast, you can wash in cold water. All right, so here's our example. Here's the Braita. Kol chayvei tfilot tovlin gedarkan. If you are obligated, here we go back to that purity issue. If you're obligated to immerse yourself. A woman at the end of the menses, if a person has touched a dead body and they go through the process of purification, and this is the day they're supposed to go to the mikvah to become completely ritually pure. In those cases, if you're obligated to go and immerse, even if bein b'tisha b'av, bein b'yom kippurin, you go and you immerse, even though you're not, for anybody else, you're not permitted to go immerse. B'mai, so in what are we talking about? In what kind of water are we talking? Ilema b'chamin, tefillah b'chamin mi'ika. If you were to say, if you thought, well, you mean you could go into a hot bath to immerse yourself in this situation? And the question is, well, who would ever go to a mikvah with hot water? Because see, a mikvah has to be natural water. So it's rainwater. Actually the one in Chicago uses glacier water, glacier ice. They haul in, I guess, from the Antarctic or something like that. And but they will use glacier ice, and they put that in their mikvah and then it warms up. But in general, a mikvah is natural water, so you can't pour hot water into the mikvah. It's actually it's much more sophisticated than that. But you can't draw hot water, and then pour it into the mikvah water. You're not supposed to. And so you can't be taught. If you say if you're obligated to go to the mikvah and it falls on Tisha B'Av, you still go to the mikvah, according to this baraita. But obviously we're talking about cold water. Ela lav bitzonin, v'chayavei tfilot inish acharina la. And so the person who's obligated to the immersion would go, but anybody else can't go. So you don't even go in cold water. Amar Rav Chana bar Katina lo nitzracha ela lechamei Tveria. No, actually, you needed to teach this because we do have places where the mikvaot are naturally hot, like in Tveria. They have hot springs in Tveria. So here, in which case you wouldn't be able to immerse. So if you're obligated on Tisha B'Av and you live in Tveria, you go to the mikvah. But if the only place to go is the natural hot water, you're not permitted. That's why they had to teach this, because while they're saying you can only go in cold water if you're obligated to go to the mikvah, if you live in Tveria, all you've got is hot water mikvaot, you know what, you can't go. Ihachi ema seifa. Now we have the second half of the baraita, which is Amar Rav China Sgan Kohanim. Kedai hu beit Eloheinu la'abed alav tefillah pam echat b'shana. So the second half of the baraita says that in the words of Rabbi Chanina, who was the deputy high priest, that it's worth it, this one day a year. If you're obligated to go to the mikvah on this one day of the year, it's worth not immersing yourself, because Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur, it's so important, you shouldn't go. It's worthy of the loss of ritual immersion once a year. Now, if you say that it's permitted to immerse in cold water, why does Rabbi Chanina say you should lose your immersion? So we have contradiction here. Let him bathe in cold water without having to neglect his immersion. You should be able to raise. But Rav Papa says, he brings up the whole issue of Tveria again. It could be argued that the baraita was just referring to a place where cold water is not available. So it's not even. It could be Tveria, or it could be a place where I don't know where else. Cold water is just not available for your mikvah, and so your water. I guess it would be anywhere, not just Tveria, but I guess anywhere where the water is naturally warm. For your natural mikvah, that in that case you wouldn't immerse in the water because it's warm, but that the idea that you could immerse in cold water still stands. So what Rav Chanina was suggesting is that he was only referring, just as the first part of the mikveh, they're only talking about hot water here. They're only talking about a hot water mikveh, and that it doesn't refer to cold water. So that if you have to wash, if you have to immerse on one of these days, you're permitted to wash, you're permitted to immerse in a mikveh in cold water. All right, now we have a tashma. So they're going to bring in some other Baraita or Mishnah.
But now, if you want to do something for which purity is required and you're not allowed to immerse.
Right. So that's why. So what Rabbi Hanina was suggesting was there are situations where some people, even though they're obligated to immerse on that day, which fell on Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur, you would push it off. And that's in a place where cold water is not available.
But then you'd still be allowed to do things like.
Well, no. I mean, you wouldn't look in the case of a woman. So the reason why the woman is supposed to go to the mikveh on the day that the day that she's obligated to go to the mikveh, she's supposed to go. Nothing else is supposed to stop her. And that's because when she comes home that night, then the husband and wife can cohabit and have sexual relations, because the idea of, I mean, I think they understood that procreation is more likely at that time of the month. And so procreation is a mitzvah. And so they're supposed to have relations. But if that woman, if it was on Tisha B'Av or on Yom Kippur when she was supposed to go, if cold water was available, a normal cold running spring where you go to your mikvah, that would be okay. But you wouldn't go, you would just have to put off a day if you lived in Tveria and all you had was hot springs. So that's the one case where the woman, or if a man was obligated to go to the mikveh that day to get into a state of ritual purity, he just push it off for the day. Now, it's a good question. What would you do if that was Yom Kippur? Well, I guess you don't have to be in the temple on Yom Kippur. Might be a problem for a priest, but you don't have. But that would be the only problem, is you just wouldn't go to you wouldn't enter the temple. You wouldn't be able to have relations with your husband that night. You'd have to put it off. But that's a pretty limited situation. It's only where you don't have naturally cold water mikvah, but you're in a place where your mikvah ot, your kosher mikvah ot, they're all hot water. Okay, so Tashma. So we have this other source. This is a Braita. Kishe amru asur b'melacha lo amru ela bayom, aval b'layla mutar. So this is going to, again, trying to understand, I think we're still on it, still on Rav Chisda, trying to figure out the cold water versus hot and cold water stuff. Okay. So here the Baraita suggests, when it says that you're forbidden to do work on these, remember these fast days that have been called because there's a drought. When it says you're forbidden from working on those days, they're only talking about the day. You're permitted to do work at night. And when they said one is prohibited to engage in wearing shoes, that was only regard to the city, but on the road, it's permitted. How does this work? When one goes out on the road, he wears shoes, but on the end of his journey, when he enters the town, he removes them. Now, I don't really know the realia of this. Like, why are the roads paved in a city so that or is it about communal, people?
I think it had to do with established urev. And so, like, the obligation is shifted. Once you leave the public road and enter the town, if you get into an urev, like, it's sort of different, I suppose. That's what I kind of thought.
Right. Yeah, but why? Why would that be? I mean, I that's what I don't know. Either it's that on the road it's so rough, it's not fair to tell a person not to wear shoes, but the town, the roads are better. Or if you're on the road, nobody sees you, but when you get to the town, then people would see you, and it's not appropriate to be wearing shoes on a fast day. I'm not really sure. It doesn't, and he didn't explain it. So, wait, actually, as long as I got the, let's just check, see if the art scroll had a suggestion. Let's see.
If you're walking between towns, most of your walking is going to be on the road. That may be a practical reason.
But also, I guess traveling on the road is generally more hazardous.
Yeah, that's well. They don't have any. They don't explain it either. It just they say wearing shoes is prohibited on a fast. Okay. Well, I guess they don't know either. All right. So any of those are possible answers. In any case, the point is that on these fast days, when because of a drought, the leadership has declared a fast. You don't work during the day, but you can work at night. You don't wear shoes, but you on the road, going out on the road outside of town, you're permitted to wear shoes. And then you have this third, and when they said that one is prohibited to engage in bathing, they said this only with regard to bathing one's entire body, but washing his face, hands, and feet is permitted. All right, now we don't have any idea about, are you talking about hot water, cold water? It's not so clear here. Similarly, then we have this ending, which is confusing. And similarly, you find that this ruling applies in the case of one who's ostracized, basically put in cherem. The term is minudeh. Or in the case of a mourner who is prohibited to engage in bathing, wearing shoes. Smearing here is smearing oil on yourself. Okay, so wait a minute. Now it says the mourner, so on Tisha B'Av, which we just learned, no, right, in Tisha B'Av, mourner you don't wash at all, according to Rav Chisda. But up here it was talking about these other fast days. It seemed to be talking about those fast days when the community declares a fast. Then you were permitted to wash in cold. So it's a little confusing here. So my lav akulhu. So isn't it that the halachot refer to all of them, including one who's ostracized and one who's in mourning. So all of these cases, that basically these three conditions all apply in the case of a mourner. But this is, again, we pointed out that's a little confusing because the mourner, you're not supposed to wash any part of your body. So, and with what form of bathing are we dealing here? So that's a question. What are we talking about? What are the details here? If we say that it's referring to hot water, for a mourner, we said that you can't wash at all. So now you're saying you can wash in hot water. You're permitted with your face, just your face, your hands, and feet are permitted. According to Rav Sheshet, you can't even put your finger in hot water. So we must be talking about elalav b'tzonei. Then we must be talking about cold water. But we said above, if so, it's prohibited on a communal fast to wash one's entire body even in cold water. So that contradicts the opinion of Rav Chisda. So we're a little lost here in terms of what's permitted and what's not permitted. But now they're going to la leolam bechamin. No, we're definitely talking about hot water. Udekakashalach, and that which was so complicated for you because you couldn't figure out how this last section about partial washing is okay on these fast days, and it's the same for a mourner, and that was the confusion. Okay, so what they're saying is that the text here up above is it is confusing because what it really should do, if I could cut and paste, This line about the minudeh and the avel should go up above here, right after the thing about shoes and working. That's true. When the mourner is not permitted to work, or these prohibitions are appropriate for the mourner too, but the washing with the body is something separate. That's not talking about the mourner. Similarly, that you find in the case of one who's ostracized, in the case of a mourner, it doesn't refer to bathing. Rather, it's referring to the rest of the prohibitions, working and wearing shoes. Consequently, it can be claimed that the Baraita refers specifically to hot water in the case up here, and that as this clause does not refer to a mourner but only to a communal fast, and bathing in cold water is permitted on communal fasts. Now, the only thing that's was confusing though is, right, it says, they said that only with regard to bathing his entire body, but washing his face, hands, and feet is permitted. So you're still, it still was unclear to me that if you can't wash even your partially wash in hot water, but you can wash your whole body in cold water, what's the deal with washing? Wait, here, sorry, it's up here. It says wash your face, your hands, and feet is permitted, but we know the whole body is permitted in cold water. So what? And at the same time, you're not allowed to wash your face, hands, and feet in hot water. So that was the confusing. That was still wanting for me. Let's see if ArtScroll does a better job of explaining. It says the analysis is incorrect. For in fact, the Baraita can refer to washing oneself with hot water. And that part that's of the Baraita, which is difficult for you to reconcile Rav Sheshet's statement regarding a mourner. So you find that these laws apply to one who has been excommunicated into a mourner. That statement relates back to the other prohibitions, right? But not to washing oneself. The prohibition against washing oneself is delineated by the Baraita, applies only to a public fast day on which hot water washing is permitted for the face, hands, and feet, and cold water for the entire body. Okay, so that is a little clearer. So in the case of these, up here in the Baraita, where it says, one is prohibited to engage in bathing, but you are allowed to partially wash your body, face, hands, and feet. We're talking about a public fast day. We're not talking about a day of mourning. You're not talking about Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur. We're talking about a public fast day, like the 10th of Tevet. And in that case, you can wash in hot water just partially. You can wash your entire body in cold water. That's how they understand. That's how ArtScroll is explaining it. But that's different from the mourner and the ostracized individual who the first half is referring to, or is consistent with. So again, and we can see here again how these ancient texts were done, or at least how they're interpreted, that the later Talmud is suggesting that this earlier text, to make sense for themselves to what their understanding of the rules are, they're splitting these texts up, right? So even though somewhere this text that we just read, the Baraita, exists as a whole piece, they are suggesting, oh no, break it apart. Extract the section about washing partially, and that is separate, and the bottom part refers only to the top half. And it's not clear whether because they had a sense that that's what the text meant, or they're what's the word I'm looking for? They're forcing the text to read it this way because their rules have changed over a couple hundred years. All right, here we have another Tashma, which is another one of these Baraita or sources. Damar Rabbi Abba HaKohen Mishum Rabbi Yossi HaKohen. Ma'aseh. This is case law. Umeitu vanav shel Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Chanina. The two sons, at least two sons, of Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Chanina, died. V'rachatz b'tzonein kol shiva, and he washed himself. Here's a case of mourning, where we said you don't wash at all, according to Rav Chisda. But he washed during the 7 days of Shiva, his whole body. Hatam shetichafuhu avalav hava. There, I just want to see how they translate tikafuhu here, because he says, okay, they translate it, one after the other. I didn't know that that's what tikafuhu meant, but okay. In that case, it was a situation where tikafuhu avalav bazeh achar zeh. The mourning periods came one after another. So obviously he lost one child, and then right in the midst, he lost the next child. Hichbid sa'aro, his beard got very heavy. Mekel batar, he was able to lighten it with a razor. Umechabes suto b'mayim, and he could. You're also not supposed to wash your clothes during the 7 days of Shiva. He did. He was able to. But Amar Rav Chisda beta'ar aval lo b'misparayim. So Rav Chisda explains that he could lighten it, but he had to do it a different way. B'misparayim, he did it with scissors, and b'mayim velo b'neter velo b'chol. I guess these were ways to really clean yourself well. He was allowed to wash himself in water, but he didn't use natron, which was as you see here, the background was a kind of soap, or with sand. I guess that would remove the dirt better. Rava says, did I miss something here? Okay, but in any case, this was an exception, right? Because it was 2 mourning periods in a row, and so for that reason he was allowed this leniency. Now here Rava says it's not about a leniency. Avel mutar lirchotz b'tzonein kol shiva. That in fact a mourner can wash in cold water during the 7 days of Shiva. Midei dehava abisra v'chamra. For the same reason that he's able to eat meat and drink wine during those 7 days. You're permitted to do that. What do I want to say? Okay, so this then is this is going against what Rav Chisda set up above, that a mourner has a much more severe limitation with washing. Okay, so here's the objection. Oh, okay, so for the objection, like often with the Talmud, we have a little big longer case to figure out what they're talking about the objection. So first we have to understand that Ein Bogeret Rasha'a Linavel et Atzma Bimei Evel Avia. A grown woman, which not a grown woman in our terms, but in traditional Judaism, a girl over 12 and a half, so Nate, watch out for Emery, girl over 12 and a half who's old enough to be married is not permitted to render herself unattractive during the days of mourning for her father. Why? Because if she's unattractive, it adversely affects her chances of marriage. It's kind of an interesting conception there, but therefore, if the only person who is not allowed to not wash because we don't want them to be unattractive is this young woman of young single woman who's of marital age. Therefore, but it says, ha na'ara rasha'a. Thus, if that's the rule, that it's only because she's of marital age, obviously everybody else, including a younger girl, 11 years old, is allowed to make themselves unpresentable, which means they don't wash. That's how we're understanding at this point, making yourself unattractive is not washing. So my lav berechitza uvemai. So what's the point? What is it not referring to? Wait, how is it? What is it? isn't it referring to the fact of washing, right? That's our assumption. When it says you can't make yourself unattractive, isn't it washing here? And if it is, if we're correct about that, what kind of water are we talking about? Ilema b'chamin, if you say it's hot water, ein bogeret rasha'a, the grown woman is not permitted to render herself unattractive by refraining from washing in hot water. But v'ha'amar Rav Chisda avel asur lahoshit etzbo b'chamin. So if we're assuming it's hot water, if we're assuming it's washing, and then we're talking about hot water, that washing in hot water, that the bogeret, in trying not to make herself unattractive, would be permitted to wash in hot water. But Rav Chisda has taught us, it's interesting, here it's Rav Chisda before it was Rav Sheshet, you can't even put your finger in hot water. So we must be talking about cold water, that she's permitted to, that the issue is washing in cold water. Wait, now I'm already lost. Up here we said a mourner is permitted to bathe in cold water, right? So Rava's argument is you can wash in hot water during Shiva. Here we've established that the only person who can wash in hot water is a young woman of marriageable age who we don't want to make her look unattractive, because if she did, then it hurts her marital chances. And she's the only one who can wash in cold water, because it can't be hot water. We ruled that out. It must be cold water. Therefore, only she can wash in cold water. The rest of us, no. That's not the answer. La akichul ufirkus. You were wrong when you assumed that not making yourself unattractive was about washing. It's really about cosmetics. She should wear cosmetics, even though one doesn't do that during the mourning period. But she has that leniency. So we're not talking about washing at all. Lema Messiah lay, okay, here we have a baraita though that supports, according to this, it supports Rava. Again, the idea that you can wash in cold water. Oh, and we have our case study. The Amar Rabbi Abba HaKohen Mishum Rabbi Yossi HaKohen Maaseh Umetu Banav Shel Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Berachatz B'Tzonein Kol Shiva. So we have this real life situation where Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen lost two children, one after the other, and during this extended mourning period, he was permitted to wash in cold water during the mourning period. Amri, hatam b'shetachafuhu avalav zeh achar zeh. Here now we understand why how this leniency fits into the legal reasoning, because that was an exception. That's why he could wash. That's not proof that's not proof that Rava is correct that you can wash during the 7 days in cold water of 7 days of mourning, because that was an exceptional situation. He had one week of Shiva after another. And here's a baraita. Titania, Tichafuhu avalav bazeh achar zeh hichbitza aro mekal beta'ar umechabes ksuto b'mayim. When you have a situation when you have one Shiva after another and your beard is growing very long, you can lighten it with a razor and you can wash your clothes. Amar Rav Chisda bata'ar avalo b'misparaim. Again, with a razor, not with scissors, because you're supposed to do it in a different way. And b'mayim, and you can wash in water, just not in the soap or the sand, or be'ahal, which is an ice plant, which I guess something that you would, I guess the crystals. This plant contains considerable amount of soda, which was used for laundering and bathing. Okay, so somehow they used this plant to help with washing. All right, now what I love about this is, okay, so we went through this whole explanation. Now, you know what? Some people actually have reported Rava's statement about washing is the exact opposite. Amarava, Avel Asur B'Tzonein Kol Shiva. You're forbidden to wash in cold water all 7 days. And Maishna Mibsar V'Yayin. So now the question is, wait a minute, but during Shiva you can eat, we are permitted to eat meat and wine, which is a sign of mourning. Why can you do that? Oh, okay, because that's an exception in the case of the 7 days. Hatam lepakuche pachte huda aved. It's the ancient version of Lexapro. You can't eat meat. You can eat meat and you can drink wine because it relieves one's anxieties. The mourner is very, very upset during this time, and they're stressed, and so eating meat and drinking wine helps get you through the period. Now, they're going to go through the exact same argument, but with Rava's opinion on the other side. So now we say, Lema Messiah lay to Rav. Here's a baraita that supports Rava's ruling. Ein bogeret rasha al in avel atzma. This is the young woman can't make herself unattractive, which means that a younger girl, because by saying that means that a person who's not of marital age, and really anybody else, is permitted to make themselves unattractive. What are we talking about, B'mai, when it says unattractive? If we're talking about chamin, hot water, then certainly if she's not supposed to make herself unattractive, shouldn't the marriageable person be permitted to wash in hot water? But Rav Chisda said you can't even dip your finger in hot water. So we must be talking about cold water, that she's permitted to wash in cold water, but no one else. No, that's not what we're talking about. Akichul ufirkos. We're talking about cosmetics. So here, so up above, it aided Rav because we said that. Wait, was this a support? Where was the? Oh no, okay. So above it was the objection. Here it's to support his statement because obviously he's ruling the other side. But in the end, it doesn't make it's not supporting his argument because we're not talking about washing. We're talking when a young marriageable woman is supposed to be making herself attractive during this period, we're talking about cosmetics and not washing.
A young widow. I mean, is this young woman they're talking about someone who's never been married?
Right. Because you want to marry her off.
You might want to marry the widow off too. So I just
right. But there's a difference there. Right? First of all, I think the difference would be is that the young woman has never been married, and you want her to marry because these, well, for a couple of reasons. One, because family units are important and having children is important, and if she's never been married, and by somehow hurting her marital prospects during this period of mourning, it makes it harder for her to get married, I guess. Then, she's not going to get married. She's not going to have children. It makes it, she may not have children, which is very, very important. Also, how does she support herself? Whereas the widow, I mean, it could be the same situation with the widow, but if the widow, one, the widow may have children, two, the widow may have support from her husband's ketubah. So there may not be as much pressure for her to get married off and have a husband to support her. Remember, in this world, marriage is really an economic issue. It's about, since you don't have it's very rare to have an independent woman in that society. Women need to be taken care of either by the father or the husband. Men need the women to support them in the home, raising children so they can go out and work. So it's not really the way we think of marriage. Although we do have so many stories about, love and especially like Rabbi Akiva and the great love he and his wife had for each other. But I think there's a greater pressure in that society to marry off an unmarried young woman than a widow. Although you're right, I mean, in practical terms, certainly for the widow, it's important.
Wouldn't
Also-
there still be the obligation of like the widow's brother-in-law would still be obligated to take care of her? At
No.
this point?
That situation is where the widow, and that's why we talking about widows. I mean, the widow could be 14 years old, right? And married for a year. But the brother-in-law's responsibility is only in a case where the brother passes away and they haven't had children. And then he's not really I don't think he's responsible for, that's a good question. I don't know if he's responsible for caring for her. He's responsible to cohabit with her so that the child they have, the first child they have, is considered to be the child of the older brother who died, childless.
Isn't this just about sons?
Wait, which is about sons?
Having to have a boy, whether she's had a boy with her first husband. I thought it was about children in general. It was about,
No, I think if she's had any children,
I thought it had to be someone to carry on the husband's name.
yeah, but I don't think that, no, I think it's just the first child and then the obligation is over. I don't think it's limited that they would have to she would have to keep having children until she has a son. I think it's just the first child. That's a good question, but I think it's just the first, that she just needs to have a child with this brother so that the experience is fulfilled. Although now that I'm thinking about it, it may not be that then the marriage is over, that he's still married to the second wife, because of course at this time you could be married to more than one woman. So it could be that the brother-in-law then continues to be a wife to the brother-in-law, and he takes care of her. So you could be right about that. I know that there's a lot of, if there have been, there are a lot of exceptions to having the brother-in-law marry her. If he's married to her sister, he can't marry her. If she's had a child that didn't survive, he can't marry her. So there are a lot of restrictions on it. But I think the first child is all that the brother-in-law owes to his dead brother. But I do think they are married. He's taking care of her. I have to look into that. Okay, so in any case, let's see. We got through that. So now we thought that baraita was an aid to Rav Chisda, who now is saying that you can't wash at all. Amar Rav Chisda zot omeret avel asur b'tichboset kol shiva. And this says that a mourner, it's prohibited for a mourner to wash laundry all 7 days of mourning. But except for these exceptional cases. All right, then we conclude this section with the halacha, which is again not always done, but here they're giving us what the final halacha is. Avel asur lerchot kol gufo bein bechaminu bein betzonein kol shiva. The mourner is forbidden to wash in hot or cold water during Shiva. Aval panav yadav v'raglav bechamin asur betzonein mutar. You're permitted to wash partially in cold water. Aval lasuch afilu kol shehu asur. But the practice of cleaning yourself with oil, smearing yourself with oil and scraping it off, that's forbidden. You can't do that unless you got dirty. So I guess there must have been an amount of a certain type of pleasure in washing in smearing and removing the oil. So that's not permitted in general. It's like hot water, but if you have to remove dirt because you fell in dirt or something, then you're permitted to do that, the oil. smearing in oil. Okay, so now we're in a new section. Slota de Tanita, Hechi Midkar Rinan. The Anenu prayer, which is what you say on a fast day. How do you mention it? Ad Barei Rav Yehuda le Rav Yitzhak Barei v'darash. Yachid shekibel alav ta'anit mitpalel shel ta'anit. Vehechen omram bein goel l'rofei. Okay, so this, first of all, I thought this was very interesting. The language here is that Rav Yehuda granted his son Rav Yitzhak permission to expound. It teaches us that in that world, one did not teach halacha before one's teacher, or if one's teacher was still alive and teaching, the student did not have permission, in this case it's a son, to teach halacha, because you follow your teacher. And for you to suggest that you should be teaching halacha, it may, and maybe there's differences, that's not permitted. So it was a very hierarchical society. But here in this case, Rav Yehuda did grant his son permission, and he allowed his son to teach a halacha. And the halacha was that an individual takes a fast upon himself, prays the prayer of the fast, which is that Anenu prayer. So if for any reason you've taken a fast upon yourself, you do pray Anenu in the Amidah. And where do you put it? He says, in between, as a separate blessing, in between the Goel prayer, which is the fourth request, and the Rofei, the blessing who heals, which is the fifth request. It's the seventh or eighth blessing in the Amidah. Now, Matkifla Rav Yitzchak strongly objects to this. This is obviously a different Rav Yitzchak, not the son of Rav Yehuda. We have 18 benedictions. Well, actually, we have 19 benedictions today, but we have 19 benedictions in the Amidah, 19 separate blessings. That's the established formula. Can you just add an additional blessing? Rav Yitzchak says, no, you can't. An individual is not permitted to do that. Rather, Rav Yitzchak said, one mentions his fast in the blessing who listens to prayer, in accordance with the general principle that an individual may insert private requests into this general plea for the acceptance of prayer. That's the last request we make in the Amidah. And similarly, Rav Sheshet said, one recites the prayer for a fast day in the blessing who listens to prayer. So we have two possibilities. You can either say the prayer separately as a separate blessing, which is the current practice today when the prayer leader says it on a fast day, when in the afternoon service, the prayer leader adds the Anenu prayer as a separate blessing. Or do you add it interpolate it into the blessing asking God to hear prayer, which is in fact what the congregation does when they recite the Amidah on a fast day. So we have these two questions. Can you do it on your own or not? Meitvei. So here's an objection. Ein bein yachid letzibur ela shezeh mitpalel shmona esrei v'zeh mitpalel tshah esrei. So there's no difference, according to this Baraita, no difference between an individual and the community on a fast day when it comes to, we're talking about prayer, except for the individual prays 18, which of course today is 19, and the community prays 19, which would be 20 today. And then they gave one of the explanations was an ahistorical explanation of how the Shmona Esrei became 19. And I say it's ahistorical because the Talmud tells us a story, but we have Geniza fragments in which there are 18 benedictions in the Amidah that don't include, wait, let me get this right, that don't have that malediction. The Talmud's explanation is the malediction in the 18 was added to criticize the maligners, the informers. And that's why we have this blessing. Well, it's not a blessing, it's a curse in the Amidah, attacking people who would form against their own. And that's why we have 19. Otherwise, it was 18 before that. But we have examples where we have 18 without the malediction. Wait, I'm sorry. Wait. We have examples from the Geniza in which there are, if you pull the malediction out and you add the extra blessing in, you still have the 18. Wait, I'm confused now. Well, anyway, we have Geniza prayers that show that there are 18, that there are 19, that's it. There are 19 blessings without the malediction. That's it. That the 19 blessings were, one of the blessings is split in two. So we have different versions of the Shmona Esrei, and the explanation they give here is not exactly a historical explanation. But in any case, at one time there were 18 blessings in the Amidah, and when on a communal fast, the community adds one more blessing, but the individual doesn't. You add it into one of the other blessings. Okay. The problem with that is, wait a minute. On a fast day, we actually have 24 blessings. We add 6 additional blessings. We haven't got to that yet, but we're going to get to it. So there's 24 on fast days. What are you talking about? Okay. Ella lav hachi kamar. Ein ben yachid de kibel alav ta'anit yachid liyachid shekibel alav ta'anit tzibur. Okay, so now we're talking about different types of fasts. There's the individual who fasts because I had a bad dream. I want to additional for pious reasons. I'm taking a fast upon myself. In that case, you don't add an additional blessing. You interpolate it into the Shema Shomei Tefillah blessing. But if on a communal fast day, then I do add. I think I got it right. Who listen to that one prays 19, right? But when you pray, and that one pray, and when you take upon yourself the communal blessing, the community fast, you're adding in an entire blessing. Ela shezeh mitpalel shmona esrei v'zeh mitpalel chaser. Shema mina yachid kovea bracha le'atzmo. But the consequence of that is that an individual can add an additional blessing to the Amidah. No, that we reject this. La. Le'olam emalach shaliach tzibur. We're talking about the shaliach tzibur. Udekaka shalach shaliach tzibur esrin va'arba matzlei b'shalosh taniyot rishonot the leka esrin va'arba. And no, we're talking about the difference between an individual takes on a fast and the shaliach tzibur on the day of a communal fast. In that case, the shaliach tzibur does add an additional blessing, a 19th blessing to the Amidah. And not only that, but the 24 blessings you're talking about, that doesn't happen on the first 3 fast days. Remember, we had, if it's a drought, we have 3 days of a fast. They declare 3-day fast. Then if it's still not getting any better, another 3 days, a little more severe restrictions. And if that doesn't work, 7 days, even more restrictions. So we're talking about the first 3 fasts in which you don't say the 24 blessings. Okay, now wait a minute. V'la, v'ha ein bein katani. Wait a minute. It says there's no difference. Ein bein. There's no difference between the first series and the second series. Ein bein shalosh rishonot l'shalosh amtziot. There's no difference between the first 3 days of fast and the second 3 days of fast, except Ella sheba'elu mutarin ba'asiyat malacha u'ba'elu asurin ba'asiyat malacha. The first 3 you can go to work. The second 3 you don't go to work. Otherwise, everything is the exact same thing. Ha le'esrim va'arba ze v'ze shavim. So in fact, we do say 24 blessings, the first three lesser fasts, and then more severe middle fasts. Okay, no, the Gemara rejects the argument and throws in this, I don't know what you call it. It's a common, whenever we deal with lists of things, this is a common argument. Tana v'shier. He taught it, but they left things out. They didn't put every detail into how the 3 days and the 3 days are different. So my shi'er, the high shi'er. So what else did he omit? What are the other things? V'tu v'ha ein bein katani. Not only that, but it did say there's no difference between the two, except for this one difference. So what are you telling me? Ela tana be'isurei ka mayre betfila lo mayre. Rather, the situation here is the reason why we can suggest that there's the prayer is the difference is because we're not talking when they said there's no difference between the first three fasts, the lesser fast, the middle three fasts. They were talking about actions for prohibitions. They weren't talking about prayer. The ibait amen. If you like, you could also argue ba'amtsiyata nami lo mitzale esrim va'arba. In fact, even the middle three, they didn't recite the additional 6 blessings in the Amidah for a drought. It was only the last 7. Villa, wait a minute, hold on. V'hatanya ein bein shalosh shniyot l'sheva acharonot. But the Baraita teaches us there's no difference between the middle 3, the second 3 fast days, and the last 7 days of very severe fast days. Ela shebe'elu matri'in v'no'alin et chanuyot, except for the fact that they shut down the shops they blow shofar and they shut the stores. So halachol divrehen zevazev shavin. So they should be equal. The middle days should be the same as the last 7 days. The last 7 days, you're telling me you say 24 blessings. So the middle days should also be 24 blessings in the Amidah. And if you tell me, wait a minute, this is no, it's a case of they taught and they left things out. They didn't give every detail. Ha ein bein katani. It said there's no difference between those the second and the last. And I think this was it. Oh, okay. So we'll get to this. So this is where we're going to end right here. Oh, it's also 12:05. So we'll get here. We'll pick this argument up next time with 14. And this week, we're going to go a little bit past daf 14 to finish the first chapter. So if you thought, wait, we're just going on and on and on, when does this thing end? We are making progress. We finished the first chapter this week. Yashar koach as we make it through. And we will meet next Sunday.
Thank you, Rab.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.